When the Grand Hunting War arrived, the entire sky over the northern domain seemed to become oppressive as dark clouds gathered, rolling in from every direction. All the powerful beings in the northern domain could feel the thick, murderous aura spreading through the air. Every force trembled under this overwhelming aura of slaughter. Even the strongest of the top-tier forces, with somewhat weaker foundations, felt uneasy. In previous Grand Hunting Wars, even some of the top-tier forces had been ruthlessly divided, with their founders failing to escape the fallen battlefield, ultimately meeting their end there. Such cruelty was beyond even the reach of Earth's supreme-level superpower beings. Every region has its own rules, and the Northern Domain's rules were no exception. Even though everyone knew the Grand Hunting War was incredibly dangerous, it was strange that none of the top-tier forces chose to resist or withdraw. The reason for this lay in the temptation of the fallen battlefield, where even the leaders of these top-tier forces couldn't resist the spiritual divine liquid. Though these leaders possessed world-shattering powers in the eyes of ordinary people, only those standing at the summit could comprehend the view beyond the mountain. They knew that within the Earth's supreme ranks, there were glaring distinctions, and the power there was even more potent, even more tempting. However, within this already distinguished level of Earth Supremes, the difficulty of gaining even a slight boost in power was akin to ascending to the heavens. Yet, the spiritual divine liquid within the fallen battlefield could make what seemed impossible to climb become far less daunting. This was an irresistible, almost fatal attraction for Earth Supremes. In the past, there were even Earth Supremes from other realms who were so envious of the spiritual divine liquid in the fallen battlefield that they tried to cross the boundary to seize it. The price for their greed was that the top forces of the Northern Domain had to join forces to expel the powerful factions from other regions. Over the years, some Earth Supremes came to the Northern Domain, working tirelessly to build their own forces, and likely, a large part of their motivation was the allure of the spiritual divine liquid within the fallen battlefield. So, when the Grand Hunting War came again, the entire Northern Domain was shrouded in an oppressive aura of slaughter. Everyone could predict the brutal wars that would erupt within the fallen battlefield. In such wars, even Earth's supreme-level super-strong beings might fall. Just thinking about such a world-shattering battle sent shivers down one's spine. In the northwest region of the Northern Domain, the Great Luo Heaven, Nine Nether's palace, Chen and Nine Nether stood before the Grand Hall. On the expansive square in front of them, the Nine Nether's guards, clad in black armor, spread out like a tidal wave, covering the entire square. They emitted a faint but palpable battle intent, their spiritual energy flowing seamlessly around them, as if they were one unified force, supremely powerful. The entire square fell silent, and all gazes were fixed on the two figures standing in front of the hall. Under the countless eyes, Chen lowered his gaze slightly, standing still and silent. His black robe accentuated his tall frame, giving off an air of calm and composure. After a year of training, the last trace of youth had vanished from his once boyish face, replaced by a refined, unhurried aura. Beside him stood Nine Nether, her slender figure encased in tight black battle armor, accentuating her striking curves. Her long, straight legs made one's blood race, and her cold, enchanting face radiated a wild, untamed charm that made anyone gaze upon her feel an instinctive urge to conquer her. Behind them stood the non-combat members of Nine Nether's palace, with Tang Bing and Tang Ro taking the lead. Boom. The stillness was broken by a booming bell ringing through the skies of the Great Luo Heaven, filled with battle intent. Immediately, an overwhelming aura of slaughter surged from every corner of the Great Luo Heaven, and in the next moment, the sound of something tearing through the air echoed as endless dark clouds erupted from the Great Luo Heaven, rising into the sky and completely blotting out the heavens. These dark clouds were like a vast army, brimming with murderous intent and ready for battle. All forces of the Great Luo Heaven, heed my command. Move out. As the boundless battle aura filled the air, the voice of Mandala rang out across the heavens and earth, exuding infinite authority. The sky seemed to shatter in an instant, and the vast army turned into countless streams of light, like locusts, roaring across the sky and sweeping toward the edge of the Great Luo Heaven. Nine Nether turned to Tang Bing and said, "The Nine Nether Palace is in your hands. Sister Nine Nether, be careful. We'll wait for your victorious return." Tang Bing and Tang Ro nodded in agreement. They understood the terrifying nature of the Grand Hunting War. Even though the Great Luo Heaven Domain was a top-tier force, it too faced the danger of complete destruction. No one could be certain whether, when the war ended, the returning armies of the Great Luo Heaven would be their own, or if other forces would flood in for a brutal plunder and division. Mu Chun and Nine Nether exchanged a glance and nodded. Mu Chun raised his hand, then suddenly swung it down, his gaze sharp. "Nine Nether guards, heed my command, depart." Mu Chun and Nine Nether were the first to transform into streaks of light and rush forward. Beneath them, the Nine Nether guards soared into the sky in overwhelming numbers, resembling a vast dark cloud following closely behind, sweeping out. The vast army departed from the Great Luo Heaven, passing through the entire domain, drawing the attention of countless powerful figures who stopped to watch. Their gazes were complex, but overall, filled with blessings. After all, they depended on the Great Luo Heaven for survival. If this great tree were to fall, it would benefit no one. As the army passed through the Great Luo Heaven, many smaller groups of soldiers would occasionally take to the skies, forces from affiliated powers of the Great Luo Heaven Domain. As they joined, the army only grew more formidable, and where they passed, dark clouds covered the sky. The battle intent surged, leaving many powerful figures trembling in fear. Under such a terrifying aura, they dared not even use their spiritual power, fearing that any disturbance could trigger a devastating flood of attacks from the overwhelming army. In the face of such a terrifying force, no one below the Earth Supreme could dare to stand in their way. At the same time that the Great Luo Heaven's army began to move, similar large forces rose up in other regions of the Northern Domain, carrying immense battle intent, sweeping across the sky like a storm. The entire Northern Domain trembled. The scene of countless lights and shadows rushing across the sky had the oppressive feeling of an apocalypse. Some smaller forces, fortunate enough to avoid participating in the Grand Hunting War, looked on with a mixture of relief and envy. They were relieved to have escaped the destructive battle but envied their own weakness, feeling that they lacked even the qualification for destruction. Whether they were relieved or envious, the most terrifying Grand Hunting War in the Northern Domain had slowly begun to unfold. This battle would surely stain the sky with blood. Northern Domain, the Far West. In stark contrast to the prosperity of other regions, the Far West appeared desolate, with solitary peaks towering and the occasional beast's roar echoing through the air, only making the land feel even more lonely. The atmosphere here seemed perpetually shrouded in a hazy aura, cold and bone-chilling. Even the spiritual energy itself felt filled with sinister energy. Farther away, there seemed to be the sound of countless battles, but upon closer inspection, the place was eerily empty, like a ghostly realm. As one's gaze moved deeper, the earth suddenly turned grotesque. A massive, several 100,000-foot-long crack appeared, tearing open the land. The crack was about 10,000 feet wide, stretching out of sight. The depths were pitch black, as if leading into the netherworld, and from within, an endless, eerie wind howled, forming a barrier that separated the inner and outer realms. At the end of the crack, a grayish aura completely concealed the area. Faint, mournful roars echoed, as though a great battle was taking place inside. This was the area where the fallen battlefield lay, a forbidden zone of the entire Northern Domain. Countless powerful beings had once entered seeking treasures, but only 1 in 10 could ever make it back out. Today, however, this desolate land in the Far West had become the focal point of the entire Northern Domain. Whoosh, whoosh. In the stillness, the sound of tearing winds suddenly filled the air. The gray sky split apart, and from the distance, countless streams of light surged forward like locusts, finally flooding the land, covering it in a dense, chaotic mass. The overwhelming spiritual energy that howled upwards at this moment also swept away the cold, sinister wind blowing out from the fallen battlefield. Outside the fallen battlefield, a massive force from the Great Luo Heaven Domain arrived, directly occupying a vast area of 1,000 miles. When the other factions saw this, they quickly dispersed, not daring to provoke the mighty Great Luo Heaven Domain. Atop a lone peak, Mu Chun stood silently, with Mandala, the three sovereigns, and other kings before him. Everyone's gaze was fixed ahead. In the rift, which seemed like a scar across the land, the black storm that swept out at that moment began to weaken at a visible speed. The barrier of the fallen battlefield rapidly grew weaker. Across this vast world, countless powerful figures held their breath, watching the scene unfold. When the black storm dissipated, it marked the moment when the grand hunting war truly began. And that moment arrived swiftly. In just 10 minutes, the black storm completely shattered. At the instant the storm fragmented, Mu Chen seemed to hear the battle intent roaring from the heavens and earth. At the forefront, Mandala lightly raised her hand and slowly waved it down. Let the battle begin. On the gray and desolate land, huge ravines crisscrossed the earth, leaving behind harsh scars that made the entire world seem alarming. A stifling and cold aura spread across every corner of this realm. Whoosh! Suddenly, a sharp wind split the air, breaking the oppressive stillness. In the distance, the grayish air was torn apart as a force of several thousand soldiers rapidly swept through low in the air. The army was clad in black armor, their movements seamless as their spiritual energy seemed to be unified. As they moved, an intense battle intent shot forth, dispelling much of the cold aura in the land. At the forefront of this army, two figures moved steadily forward. It was Mu Chun and the Nine Nether. The map given to us by the Domain Lord shows that the ruins should be in the northwest. We might reach it in half a day. Nine Nether glanced around, and then turned to Mu Chun with a smile, speaking. Although we haven't seen the ruins yet, I estimate it should be a third-grade ruin. A third-grade ruin? Mu Chun blinked in surprise. It's a rating system for the ruins in the Grand Hunting War, Nine Nether explained. Except for some small ones that can't be rated, they are usually divided into 3 grades, third grade being the lowest, and first grade the highest. Above first grade ruins are what are known as Earth's Supreme Treasures, Nine Nether continued. But those treasures are usually deep within the fallen battlefield, and they're protected by its formation. They're not only hidden deeply, but are also very troublesome to open, even if you find them. The ruin we're heading for is probably a third grade ruin. It's not too high or low, so it's worth us going for. Mu Chun nodded. Will other forces be targeting that third-grade ruin? Nine Nether frowned slightly before answering. They probably will. Each time the fallen battlefield opens, the terrain changes drastically due to the spiritual energy storms. So previous maps are useless. The one we have now is very rough, with a small scope, indicating that the ruin isn't deep within the fallen battlefield. That means it could easily be discovered by other forces. Our only advantage is that we can take the lead. If we can reach the third-grade ruin first and extract fallen source pills, we can quickly leave. Mu Chun shrugged. Well, no use talking about it. We should prepare for battle. There are so many people flooding into the fallen battlefield. I don't believe no one will get lucky and find the ruins first. With a light push of his toes, Mu Chun's speed suddenly increased. Behind him, the 9 Nether guards quickly accelerated, shooting through the sky like countless streaks of light, following closely. As Mu Chun and his group moved toward the marked ruin, they began to sense the Grand Hunting War intensifying. In just half a day of travel, they encountered nearly dozens of different factions. Some even started fighting before reaching the ruins due to old grudges, and the violent spiritual energy shockwaves caused the ground to tremble. Their group was large, naturally attracting wary and cautious gazes from others. However, overall, they hadn't faced much resistance. After all, the fierce battle intent emanating from the 9 Nether guards made it clear that this army was not made up of just any ordinary force. To train an army as strong as this in the northern domain required immense resources. Just by observing the 9 Nether guards, one could tell that such an army could only be nurtured by forces of a certain caliber, not those weak factions. Therefore, no one foolish enough dared to interfere, and even those who might have had the urge to follow from a distance quickly abandoned the thought. After all, anyone who could enter the fallen battlefield wasn't a fool and knew how taboo it was to recklessly follow others. With no further interruptions along the way, after half a day, Mu Chen's group gradually slowed down. This area was extremely desolate, with the land appearing dark gray, making the oppressive atmosphere in the world even more suffocating. Once they entered this region, Chen could distinctly feel the coldness in the air growing even thicker. "We must be close." Nine Nether exchanged a glance with Chen, then made a hand gesture. The 9 Nether guards immediately slowed down as sharp gazes swept across the land. Chen and 9 Nether moved, leaping onto a lone peak. The view before them suddenly expanded, revealing a vast black swamp. A chilling mist swirled in the air above it, and within that mist, the outlines of dark palaces could be faintly seen. From these palaces, a dense, dark aura continuously emanated, eventually converging into swirling dark vortices in the air. Those dark auras are fallen origin energy. With them, we can refine fallen source pills. 9 Nether's eyes gleamed as she looked at the swirling dark vortices, smiling. From the strength of this fallen origin energy, we should be able to refine around 100 fallen source pills. This barely counts as a third-grade ruin. Chen, also intrigued, looked at the swirling vortices. They seemed to be filled with enormous spiritual energy, but this energy was particularly cold, a result of the countless death wills of fallen strong cultivators that had accumulated over time. This unique force was a necessary material for refining the fallen source pills. Chen retracted his gaze, then waved his hand lightly. He swiftly descended from the peak, with the 9 Nether guards following closely, swooping down like a tide and landing steadily outside the swamp. However, just as Chen was about to take action, both he and 9 Nether suddenly tensed. Their eyes narrowed, and a dangerous glint flickered in their gazes. They both sensed a series of spiritual energy fluctuations emanating from this area, and all of them seemed to be directed towards them. As expected, the third-grade ruin had been discovered by other forces. It seems this ruin won't be so easy to claim. Chen shrugged helplessly at 9 Nether. Whoever dares snatch from my 9 Nether palace, I'll show them who has the guts. 9 Nether coldly snorted, her face filled with coldness, clearly enraged. Chen smiled, unhurried, standing calmly. He wasn't planning to rush into taking the fallen origin energy just yet, since refining the fallen source pills required some time. If they didn't clear out the external interference, the refining process would become quite troublesome. Behind them, the 9 Nether guards had clearly realized someone was approaching to interfere. Swish, swish. Chen and the others' wait lasted only a few minutes before it was abruptly interrupted by the loud sound of wind tearing through the air. Chen looked up, only to see a large group of shadows streaking across the sky in the distance, eventually landing around the lone peak. These individuals clearly came from different forces, and judging by their numbers, they were not insignificant. Among them were powerful fluctuations of spiritual energy that couldn't be underestimated. However, Chen merely glanced at them with a calm expression, his handsome face as unruffled as ever. Haha, looks like luck is on our side. We found a third-grade ruin right away. It seems like some people have arrived before us. Such a powerful army. Could it be the forces of 9 Nether's palace from the great Luo Heaven domain? This is trouble. We've run into a tough group. When these groups of people appeared in the vast land, they immediately noticed the 9 Nether's guard outside the swamp. Some of them, with sharp eyes, quickly recognized Chen and his group. Many of their expressions shifted, as the might of the great Luo Heaven domain was still something to fear, especially for forces of lesser standing. Normally, in the northern domain, they would not dare to provoke the great Luo Heaven domain. But the chaos of the fallen battlefield had weakened the authority of top-tier forces, so despite their wariness, many of them couldn't help but cast cautious glances. Chen calmly observed the groups, his voice carrying through the spiritual energy that surrounded him. I am Chen from the great Luo Heaven domain. This ruin was first discovered by my domain. I hope you will show courtesy and refrain from interfering. Chen? Is he the one ranked third on the Dragon and Phoenix record? Oh, he's the rising star, the super dark horse in Dragon Phoenix Heaven, Chen. As soon as Chen's name was mentioned, it immediately caused a stir. Clearly, his reputation had spread in the northern domain in recent times. Some of the groups exchanged glances, and it was clear they were reconsidering their course of action. Given the reputation of the Great Luo Heaven Domain and Mu Chun, they understood that attempting to seize the ruin from them wouldn't be an easy feat, especially with the formidable Nine Nethers guard. Mu Chun noticed the hesitation in their eyes, his expression relaxing slightly. However, just as he thought he could resolve this issue without conflict, a loud, mocking laugh rang out from the distance, as if a thunderclap echoing across the sky. Haha, just a brat, and you're spouting such nonsense? The Great Luo Heaven Domain is impressive? You might not even survive the Grand Hunting War. Don't wave that tiger skin around as a flag. Others might fear you, but my dragon snake sect does not. As that laugh boomed, a rush of wind followed, and countless lights shot toward the ground, finally landing on the earth. Mu Chun looked up. His expression darkened slightly as he watched the lights rush toward him. The mocking laughter continued to echo through the air like thunder, and as the light faded, a gray-armored army appeared before everyone's eyes. The army's numbers were no fewer than those of the Nine Nethers guard. On their armor, a large black serpent was engraved, exuding a fierce, menacing aura. At the forefront of the army stood two figures. One appeared to be middle-aged, his face pale and beardless, while the other was incredibly rugged, his body like an iron tower. Just standing there seemed to make the ground tremble beneath him. The man resembling an iron tower wore a mocking smile as he gazed at Mu Chun and the others outside the swamp. It was clear that the earlier thunderous laugh came from him. That's Lu Wu and Lu Kuei, the two sect leaders of the Dragon Snake sect. At that moment, those present realized who this army was. They quickly recognized the group, and surprised voices began to emerge. Dragon Snake sect? Mu Chun's black eyes gleamed with a hint of coldness as he looked at the approaching army. He had heard of this force before. It was a prominent faction in the Northern Domain, though not as powerful as the Great Luo Heaven Domain. They were located quite far away, and it seemed they had ties with the Divine Hall. Mu Chun turned his head slightly and exchanged a cold gaze with Nine Nether. I am Lu Wu from the Dragon Snake sect. Heh, I suppose you must be the master of the Nine Nethers Palace, one of the 9 kings of the Great Luo Heaven Domain, right? The middle-aged man with a clean-shaven face smiled faintly as he addressed Nine Nether. Nine Nether gave him a cold glance and said, Your Dragon Snake sect really has some nerve, daring to steal something from my Great Luo Heaven Domain. Do you really think that just because you've latched onto the Divine Hall, we in the Great Luo Heaven Domain can't do anything to you? Lu Wu smiled and replied, If it were any other time, my Dragon Snake sect would indeed think twice. But now, with the Grand Hunting War in progress, even your Great Luo Heaven Domain is but a clay idol crossing a river. So don't try to scare me with that title. My Nine Nethers Palace alone is more than enough to deal with the likes of you, Nine Nethers said coldly. What a boast, came a sneering voice. Standing beside Lu Wu, a towering figure resembling an iron tower, Lu Kuei gave a sinister grin. Crossing his arms over his chest, he tilted his head and mockingly looked at the 9 Nether guards behind Mu Chun. As far as I know, your 9 Nether guards are the weakest army in the Great Luo Heaven Domain. You've been bullied for years, and yet you didn't even dare to fight back. Now you're parading around. Are you looking to lose even more face? Hearing his insulting words, the eyes of the thousands of 9 Nether guards began to flare with murderous intent. Their sharp gazes locked onto Lu Kuei, and the overwhelming battle will surged around them. Lu Kuei sensed the rising battle will, and his mocking smile faltered. His eyes turned slightly cold. As a military commander himself, he understood that only a force capable of refining such battle intent could be something more than a rabble. I've heard that within your Dragon Snake sect, there are 2 famous armies, the Dragon Guard and the Serpent Guard. If I'm not mistaken, the army behind you should be the Serpent Guard, right? Mu Chun finally spoke, his black eyes calmly sweeping over the troops behind Lu Kuei. That army was similar in size to the 9 Nether guards, but an ominous, chilling energy surrounded them, like venomous snakes lurking in the shadows, making them seem not to be underestimated. This army, too, was one of the most powerful forces Mu Chun had encountered among the other factions so far. The kid may be a bit green, but his eyesight isn't bad. Lu Kuei chuckled, his smile wide as he focused on Mu Chun. So, you're the Mu Chun who's been making waves in the Northern Domain, right? To achieve so much at your age is quite impressive. But this place is beyond someone like you to handle. You should go home, train for a few more years, and then come back. You overestimate yourself, Mu Chun replied with a smile, shaking his head. Lu Kuei's broad, muscular face twitched slightly. Then his narrowed eyes flashed with a fierce light, and a tremendous surge of spiritual power radiated from his body. The overwhelming spiritual pressure immediately enveloped the area. Mu Chun raised an eyebrow, sensing the spiritual pressure. Lu Kuei may not be much in terms of character, but his strength was certainly impressive. The spiritual pressure was at the level of a 5th grade supreme, and it was clear that it was far stronger than Qiu Taiyin's initial foray into 5th grade supreme. 5th grade supreme strength, and you dare to show off here? Nine Nether's beautiful eyes glinted coldly. Within her body, purple flames seemed to flare up, immediately dispersing the chilling aura in the air and breaking apart Lu Kuei's spiritual pressure. Master of Nine Nether, no need to get angry. If you don't think my third brother's 5th grade supreme strength is enough, I'm sure I can impress you more, Lu Wu said with a light smile, raising his hand slowly. A massive surge of spiritual energy shot into the sky, and it rippled through the air like an ocean, with the sound of rushing water echoing, signaling the immense concentration of power. The powerful spiritual pressure he emitted was far beyond that of Lu Kuei. Solidified spiritual energy. 6th grade supreme. Nine Nether's beautiful eyes narrowed as she gazed coldly at Lu Wu, her face frosty. It seems that the Dragon Snake Sect's ability to become a top-tier force in the Northern Domain is indeed rooted in solid foundations. With such strength, even among the kings of the Great Luo Heaven Domain, they would rank in the middle to upper levels. Furthermore, it is said that the Dragon Snake Sect has 3 sect masters, and right now, Lu Wu and Lu Kuei are only ranked 2nd and 3rd. Upon witnessing the scene before them, the various factions gathered in this world quickly realized that a large-scale battle was inevitable. While the Great Luo Heaven Domain is famous, only a branch of the Nine Nether Palace is present here. Although the Dragon Snake Sect may not rival the Great Luo Heaven Domain, it is still a first-rate power, and clearly, they have no intention of relinquishing control of this 3rd-grade ruin. Since neither side is willing to compromise, the ownership of the ruin will clearly have to be settled in the most direct way, through force. However, the gathered forces are quite pleased with the standoff, as a battle between 2 tigers will surely result in one being injured. Only in such circumstances will they have a chance to fish in troubled waters. Mu Chun narrowed his eyes, observing the Dragon Snake Sect's formation. From one perspective, their strength didn't seem to be any weaker than that of the Nine Nether Palace. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the courage to forcefully seize the ruin. It seems that a fierce battle is unavoidable if they want to claim this ruin. That guy is mine to deal with, Nine Nether said coldly as she fixed her gaze on Lu Wu. She then turned to Mu Chun, who nodded in response. With that, Nine Nether's figure slowly rose into the air. Behind her, purple light gathered, transforming into a pair of massive purple wings, which burned with blazing purple flames. The sharp, clear screech that emanated from Nine Nether's body caused the vast spiritual energy waves to ripple across the world. Within the shrill cry, the spiritual pressure emanating from Lu Wu was scattered to a large extent. Nine Nether Soul Sparrow? Lu Wu's eyes flickered with a trace of wariness. He knew all too well how troublesome beings with divine beast bodies could be. Lu Wu's gaze shifted, and he smiled lightly. Nine Nether Palace Master, I know you are the Nine Nether Soul Sparrow, and your combat prowess is extraordinary. If we were to fight, it would likely be hard to determine a winner. Nine Nether didn't respond to his words, but merely said indifferently, If you don't want to fight, then get lost. Lu Wu raised an eyebrow and chuckled. How about we settle the ownership of this ruin in another way? And how would you suggest that? Nine Nether sneered, not in a hurry to make a move. Lu Wu indeed had some abilities, and if they fought, it would likely take some effort. Moreover, in a place like this, no one knew if more powerful forces might be attracted, so she preferred to conserve her strength if possible. I've heard that the 9 Nether Guards of the Nine Nether Palace are the elite troops of the Great Luo Heaven Domain. I wonder how they compare to my Dragon Snake Sect's Serpent Guards. Lu Wu smiled. How about we have both armies compete? The winner gets the ruin. What do you think? I'm just afraid that this wet behind-the-ears kid doesn't have the guts, Lu Kuei sneered, folding his arms and looking at Mu Chen. He could see that the 9 nether guards were under Mu Chen's command. Although Mu Chen appeared rough and burly, Lu Kuei saw through him as a cunning individual. His words dripped with sarcasm, clearly trying to provoke Mu Chen into a confrontation over their armies. Lu Kuei led the Serpent Guards and had dominated the northern domain for years with impressive battle results. So, he didn't view Mu Chen, a young leader, as much of a threat. However, when 9 Nether heard their plan, she didn't get angry. Instead, a playful smile appeared on her face. Below, Mu Chen also smiled slightly. He turned to the 9 Nether Guards and asked, "Someone plans to provoke our 9 Nether Guards. What do you think we should do? Kill?" The eyes of the thousands of 9 Nether Guards instantly became fierce, and they all shouted in unison. The murderous aura they exuded caused Lu Kuei, who had previously been grinning menacingly, to involuntarily shrink his pupils. Seeing the slight curve of Mu Chen's lips, Lu Kuei's heart suddenly stirred with unease. This situation, which he originally thought would be the easiest to deal with, seemed to be taking an unexpected turn. Yet, Lu Kuei wasn't an ordinary person. He quickly suppressed the unease rising in his heart, and his eyes turned cold. He intended to annihilate the so-called 9 Nether Guards, leaving no trace behind. Now, let me teach you how to wield battle will. When Lu Kuei heard Mu Chen's words, his brutish face trembled with anger, before it twisted into a sinister smile. The murderous intent in his eyes nearly spilled over. Within the Dragon Snake sect, although his strength ranked only 3rd among the 3 sect masters, he still had his own strengths. One of them was his natural talent for battle will. While this alone was not enough to make him a battle formation master, commanding the battle will of thousands of soldiers was not difficult for him. In this regard, he was far superior to the 2nd sect master, Lu Wu. This was why the Serpent Guards were under his command, rather than the stronger Lu Wu. Those who had fought against the Dragon Snake sect knew that although Lu Kuei was a 5th grade supreme, once he controlled the Serpent Guards, his terrifying combat power made even Lu Wu, a 6th grade supreme, wary of crossing him. In that state, Lu Kuei would gather the full strength of the Serpent Guards, and with his own power, even a 6th grade supreme would have to tread carefully. This was the immense advantage brought by mastering battle will, enough to wield strength that surpassed one's own rank. So, when Lu Kuei, who had a natural talent for battle will, heard Mu Chen claim he would teach him how to wield battle will, his rage erupted like a volcano. The twisted grin on his face seemed to promise he would tear Mu Chen apart. Around them, the other experts were exchanging looks, clearly stunned by Mu Chen's sudden, arrogant words. After all, Mu Chen had always given off a calm and composed aura, and this sudden shift in attitude caught everyone off guard. While they were still processing their surprise, they couldn't help but frown slightly at Mu Chen's words. After all, Lu Kuei, standing before him, was no trivial character. The Serpent Guards he commanded had achieved impressive victories over the years, and no one here would dare to speak to him the way Mu Chen had. At this moment, Mu Chen seemed a little too young and reckless in their eyes. But Mu Chen paid no attention to their thoughts. The 9 Nether battle will, like a surging ocean, spread around him. His face remained calm, with no fluctuation in his eyes. Lu Kuei indeed had some talent in battle will, but that talent could never elevate him to a true battle formation master. His understanding of battle will was still at its most basic level. The path of battle arrays is controlled by force at the lowest level, and by the heart at the highest. Lu Kuei was still in the phase of controlling by force, while Mu Chen, having grasped the essence of battle arrays, was on a completely different level. With the same army, under these 2 different levels of control, the power of battle will that could be unleashed would be worlds apart. Mu Chen slowly spread his hands, and his consciousness, without holding back, flowed out, coming into contact with the surging 9 Nether battle will. Without resistance, it perfectly merged with his own. The shrill roar of the battle will surged toward him, yet it could not disturb his state of mind. His thoughts seemed to grow infinitely powerful as the battle will float around him. Rumble. The dark, overwhelming battle will began to gather around Mu Chen, and everyone could feel that the 9 Nether battle will was rising higher and higher. The sense of pressure quietly enveloped the area. Mu Chen's black eyes flashed with a sharp, cold light, and in that instant, the battle will erupted. His hand suddenly clenched into a fist. Boom! A massive burst of 9 nether battle will shot into the sky and gathered into the form of a black feather about 100 feet long. Lightning flickered across the black feather, exuding a destructive force of unimaginable power. The surrounding experts, upon seeing the black feather, couldn't help but feel a shiver down their spines. Even several of the 5th grade Supreme experts had a change in expression, sensing the immense threat from the black feather. Go! Mu Chen's gaze lowered slightly, and with a flick of his finger, the black feather shot through the void like a feather sword, carrying an unparalleled sharpness, slashing fiercely at the serpent guards. Swoosh! Before the feather sword could even land, the ground below was torn open, leaving a deep scar. I want to see how you, a brat, intend to teach me how to wield battle will. Lu Kuei, feeling the sharp battle will in the black feather sword, narrowed his eyes. However, this did not make him feel fear. He grinned fiercely and roared, "Serpent guards!" Below, within the ranks of the serpent guard army, a sound of slaughter immediately erupted. A dark gray battle will spread through the air, and Lu Kuei clenched his palms. In an instant, the dark gray battle will surged and condensed wildly, eventually forming a huge and vicious dark gray serpent halberd. A cold and sinister aura radiated from it, causing the temperature of the surrounding air to drop drastically. Serpent Demon Halberd. Lu Kuei stomped his foot, and the dark gray serpent halberd twisted like a serpent. The next moment, the space itself was torn apart as the halberd shot forward, clashing head-on with the black feather sword. Boom! The violent shockwaves of power rippled through the sky, warping the space around them. The two forces of savage power collided and devoured each other. Everyone was watching the scene in the sky. To their astonishment, the collision of these two overwhelming battle wills revealed that the 9 nether battle will seem to be gaining the upper hand. Within that battle will, the sound of thunder seemed to echo, preventing the sinister force of the serpent guard's battle will from infiltrating even the slightest bit. Boom! The invasion didn't last long. The serpent demon halberd was shattered, but as it broke, the black feather sword dimmed considerably, clearly having consumed a great deal of energy. So when the black feather sword, with what little strength remained, attacked Lu Kuei, he easily waved it aside. However, Lu Kuei's face was still dark with anger, as anyone could tell that. In the earlier clash of battle wills, the 9 nether battle will had managed to gain a slight advantage. Is this the battle will you want to teach me? Not that impressive, Lu Kuei said, his face turning ashen. Upon hearing this, many people in the surrounding area couldn't help but scoff. After all, they weren't blind. The earlier attack from Mu Chen had clearly posed a significant threat to Lu Kuei, but this guy refused to admit it. This scene also made many of them more cautious. They had initially thought that Mu Chen was just boasting, but now it was clear that this young man indeed had astonishing talent and battle will, and they could no longer afford to underestimate him because of his age. Mu Chen heard Lu Kuei's words, but merely smiled lightly. He then slowly closed his eyes and spread his hands out. Gurgle. Within the vast 9 nether battle will, it seemed to quietly boil at this moment. Then, the 9 nether battle will suddenly trembled, and one by one, enormous beams of 9 nether battle will shot skyward. As these battle will beams condensed, black feathered swords began to form once again within them. Each of these swords was no weaker than the previous one, and now, with nearly a dozen of them gathered together, the power was so overwhelming that even the strongest of the surrounding experts couldn't help but gasp in shock. One black feather sword had already caught Lu Kuei off guard, and now, with over a dozen, even a 6th grade Supreme would be in extreme danger. How could he control his battle will to this extent? An expert exclaimed in disbelief. To refine battle will to this degree in one go was not something an ordinary commander could easily achieve. High above, 9 nether and Lu Wu watched the scene. The former smiled faintly, but the latter's face turned dark. He couldn't help but mutter, "Looks like we underestimated him. No wonder the 9 nether palace master wasn't in a rush. This kid has been hiding his power." Whoosh! Amidst the exclamations from the crowd, Mu Chen showed no hesitation. With a flick of his sleeve, the dozen massive black feather swords shot out like lightning, racing towards Lu Kuei. Lu Kuei's expression became extremely serious at this moment. Although he too was shocked by Mu Chen's ability to wield battle will to such a degree, he knew he had no choice but to stop the fatal attack coming his way. At this point, he had to admit that Mu Chen seemed to have a better grasp of battle will than him. At the very least, he knew that similar attacks, like the earlier Serpent Demon Halberd, he would never be able to condense with such precision or in such numbers as Mu Chen had done. Serpent Demon Shield. Lu Kuei's hand seals changed in an instant, and he bellowed. The vast Serpent Guard battle will surged forth, eventually forming a dark, gray shield of light. When the Serpent Demon Shield had just formed, the dark black feather swords had already torn through the void, then shot out mercilessly in violent stabs. Bang! The crisp sound echoed at that moment. Every time a dark black feather sword struck the Serpent Demon Shield, it shattered into pieces after ripples surged through the air. However, each time a feather sword broke, the snake-shaped shadows on the Serpent Demon Shield would emit a chilling screech, and the ripples would fluctuate violently. Bang! 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 The sound of feather swords breaking continued one after another. When the last feather sword shattered, the Serpent Demon Shield finally cracked, revealing the somewhat sinister face of Lu Kuei. Boom! Facing the last feather sword that shot towards him, Lu Kuei's face contorted in a grimace. He didn't retreat. Instead, he shot forward, throwing a punch. In an instant, overwhelming battle intent spread, all gathering in the wind of his punch. Then, gathering all his power, he struck the final feather sword. Boom! This ultimate punch not only shattered the space, but even the fatal feather sword, which could have severely wounded a fifth-grade supreme expert, crumbled under his fist, breaking into pieces. The many powerful experts in the heavens and earth exclaimed in shock. This Lu Kuei was indeed no pushover. With his punch shattering the feather sword, Lu Kuei's aura seemed to reach its peak. His fierce gaze shot toward Mu Chen, and he grinned savagely. Ignorant child, do you think you can defeat me like this? Mu Chen looked at the awe-inspiring Lu Kuei. Instead of being startled, he smiled with interest, then gently nodded, exhaling a puff of white mist as he murmured, "Come forth." As his words fell, the overwhelming nine-nether battle will behind him suddenly surged, and deep within that battle will, something seemed to be quietly breaking out of its shell. A strange fluctuation began to spread. The first to sense this fluctuation was Lu Kuei. In an instant, his aura seemed to collapse, his twisted face turning pale. He looked in fear at the boiling nine-nether battle will, his scalp instantly going numb. He looked as if he had seen a ghost.